everybody, so in today's video I'm going to be sewing a mock-up of Simplicity 8447, this very cute, very popular overalls pattern. Spoiler alert, I think it turned out super cute. I'm really happy with it. So if you are interested in seeing how I sewed through this pattern, then go ahead and keep on watching. So today we are going to be working on Simplicity 8447, these super, I'd call them pretty famous overalls. They're a work overall, very Rosie the Riveter-esque kind of silhouette. I'm excited for these because I've been keeping up with the youths lately a little bit, and I've noticed that overalls seem to be coming back in style, and I've seen it not just in the internet but also like in real life. And even though I hated overalls when I was a kid, I'm kind of feeling it. I kind of want some overalls, but I have a pretty long torso, so a lot of, you know, full body garments don't really fit me that well, so I like the idea of potentially making them. Also, I just ordered my 4th pair of cowboy boots. So I'm looking for more wide leg pants to wear with them, and this is kind of a wider leg, or a straight leg kind of trouser, but since I'm going to be making this in a larger size, it's going to be kind of wide leg. Anyway, I think I will be making this pattern as is on a size 20. I don't plan on adding any sort of length at any point in the garment because I have a long torso, but I also have comparatively short legs. So garments that are limited by like the ground up, I tend to not have to worry about because my long torso makes up for the short legs. But any garments that I have to put on from like the top down, I do have to lengthen because that's the top part needs to be lengthened. So I think I'm going to make these as is, see what happens, and yeah, let's go ahead and get to cutting. So I'm immediately a little overwhelmed by this conglomeration of pattern paper, and this is only the half of it. There's still an unfolded packet back there, so this is a thick envelope. But I do want to point out right here, the first thing I notice is that size 1, or piece 1 has different pieces for different sizes. So this is one of those patterns that has every other size. So this is size, what is this, 18, 20, 16, 20, and 24. So yeah, just, you know, be aware, make sure you're cutting out all the right size, all that good stuff. And for the overalls, which is view B, we need pieces 1 through 16. So I might be here a while, and I'll spare you all of that. Every piece but one. Every piece you need but one is on this one bundle of patterns. But piece 13, the facing, is in this other bundle. And I just want to know whose idea it was that every waistband needed its own separate pattern piece for each size. But you couldn't consolidate that? You couldn't consolidate that even a little bit? I'm not happy. The instructions are thoroughly convinced that I can fit all 16 of those pieces on a 3 5/8 yard long piece of fabric, of 45-inch wide fabric. I'll believe it when I see it. Although that being said, I'm looking at the diagrams that they give you to kind of lay things out if you need help with it, and not a lot of it is done folded. A lot of it is done like opened after you do all the folded stuff, so we'll see. Alright, hold on. I misspoke. You need pieces 1 through 16, except for piece 5. You don't need piece 5 for the overalls. That's just for the pants. I was very concerned for a second because it wasn't in any of the diagrams, and I was about to be very upset. Then I realized it's just view A. Don't need it. Okay. You also don't need piece 4. I promise, one of these days I'm going to learn how to read. Also, real quick, piece 13, which is this kind of facing piece, or I assume facing piece for this bodice thing. Anyway, piece 13 is the only one that has multiple sizes, but the sizes are sequential for your pattern piece. So you have one pattern piece with the smaller sizes, and then you have another one for 20, 22, and 24. So just be careful when you're cutting out that one, because to my knowledge, that is the only one that's different, at least for the overalls. Alright, so my pattern pieces there and up there, and I was able to
fit all of this on 3.5 yards of fabric, so in case you, I don't know, don't like weird fractions, you don't really need that extra eighth of a yard. It was a tight squeeze, and I don't know if it will 100% work for the larger sizes above a size 20, but I was able to get a size 20 cutout of 45-inch wide fabric on 3.5 yards of fabric.
Now, when you're transferring markings, it does help to have some sort of writing implement, ideally something that will disappear in the wash or with heat, some sort of ruler and straight edge, and also your quality assurance manager to make sure that you're not messing up the job. Are you napping on the job? Management.
All right, so here I have the pants front pieces, and step one involves sewing these darts and pressing them towards the center. So that is this kind of curved edge over here. That's going to be the center of the pant. So stitch it, press it, pretty straightforward. I don't really think I need to show y'all that. It's pretty easy. All right, the next step is to go ahead and start working on the pockets. Now, the instructions only talk about, in detail doing the pants pocket, but the shirt pocket, or the, bodice pocket is done exactly the same way. So we're going to do them at the same time, just save myself a couple of trips to the iron and back. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this unnotched edge of the pocket band. We're going to fold that up by 5/8 of an inch. Then we're going to go to the iron and press that. Okay, so here I have the pants pocket and the bodice pocket. So now that we have this pressed up, the instructions do tell you to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch. I'm not entirely sure why, so we're going to run a little experiment, and I trimmed this pants pocket down to 1/4-ish of an inch seam allowance, and I am leaving this one as is just to kind of see what happens. So now you are going to pin the right side of the pocket band to the wrong side of the pants pocket. So this is supposed to be the right side of the pocket. So this is the one with the pattern. This is the one that looks nice. This is the pretty side. And this is the wrong side of the pants pocket. So now we're going to sew around the edges here. We're going to clip some corners, and then we're going to clip. I'll show you when we get there. And then we're going to do some more pressing and some more magic, and we'll have pockets. So here's what the pieces look like after their quick little snip. So we have the corners clipped. And also here's what it looks like to do that kind of weird clipping that they want to do to the seam allowance. So it comes in straight along this folded edge, but it's going to be on the big side, not the folded side. So straight along there, and then with a tiny little wedge cut out going down. And here's what that looks like. And that allows us to turn this right side to right side, and you have this little thing showing, and then you get to clip this or bring that to the back, so you have this cool little detail on the front, which we're going to stitch down, and it's going to look neat and good once it's pressed. It's not pressed yet. Anyway, you might be thinking that's kind of a lot of work, and it seems a little odd, so I did a little experimenting, and I sewed one of the extra pieces right sides together and did, clip my corners. And when I flipped it right side out, we lose that extra detail because now this is the wrong side and this is the right side. But if you wanted to stitch across there, you'd also have a similar kind of seaming detail. And this way you don't have any visible raw edges on the outside. You just have to worry about fiddling with that point down there, and everything is neatly encased. So, up to you if you want to do this how the instructions tell you to, or if you want to, go off-roading a little bit. Anyway, I'm going to get all of these turned and pressed and then sewn, and then we'll move on. So here's what those look like, all pressed and seamed. They're mostly symmetrical. If you don't look too closely, they look fine. So the next step is to attach this pants pocket to the pants. And here we have the right front half of the pants. And this is the right side when you're wearing it, not the right side when you're looking at it. So if you get a little confused, just kind of hold it up to yourself. Remember that this long curved seam is going to be in the crotch. This is going to go between the legs, so if you get confused as to which piece is which, just remember it's the right side when you're wearing it. Alright, but this right front side has some very convenient little or rather large circles here that match up just so perfectly with this pocket. All right, so now we're going to stitch the pocket on the edge along these sides, and yeah, that's the pocket. All right, so I'm reading ahead, and it looks like there's a little bit of a special instruction on how to kind of reinforce this corner where it basically wants you to sew a triangle. So the instructions kind of tell you to sew along the top edge of the pocket and then come down the side, and somehow you're supposed to make a triangle from that. That doesn't seem to make much sense. So I think if I come down from a little bit further down and I head out a little bit towards this edge and then come back and then come down, I think that'll still work. It's not exactly what the instructions are telling me to do, but I think that should still work. Also, side note, I haven't really seen any much of a difference in my little experiment of trimming this part down or not. So yeah, if you wanted to skip that, you totally could. So here is what that looks like when it is finished. So I just kind of started on this edge, went up, across, and then down, and then up, and then across, and then back, cutting at the angle. So here is what that looks like done. I left a relatively large kind of seam allowance here. It's still within the actual turned under seam allowance, so there's no raw edges or anything hiding under here. It's just, I don't know, in my mind I feel like having a wider kind of seam allowance and allowing for a little bit more fabric on either side makes the seam a little stronger, especially for things like pockets that in theory are going to have, you know, a decent amount of pull and wear on them. I don't know if there's any like actual basis to that or if it's all in my head, but anyway, that's what I did. So now moving on, we are going to attach the front to the backs at the center seam. So that is this seam underneath the curved edge. So you have your curved edge, and then you have your long seam. So make sure you are putting together the right front and the right back and the left front and the left back. So I'm going to pin that and sew that and probably press it open because that's what I do. And then we will move on. Does anybody else ever see just the sheer amount of fabric you need to make clothes for your body and your confidence just immediately tanks? No? Just me? Okay. So now that we have our right pant leg and our left pant leg, we are going to attach them together at this crotch seam, this center rounded seam. If you haven't sewn pants before, it seems a little counterintuitive. It doesn't seem to make much sense. And even me having sewn many pairs of pajama pants in my life, it still doesn't really make much sense, but this is how you do it, and I promise it works out. So we're going to match up right sides together, our right and our left pant legs, and you're going to match these up, and we're going to pin and sew around this curved edge. So here's what it looks like after you have sewn up that crotch seam. Oh, I'm sorry, am I blocking you? So here's what it looks like after you have sewn up the seam. I did my best to try to press this open as well as I can. Curves don't really like to get pressed open. So now we are going to actually assemble the pant legs, the tubes, if you will. And I basically have to reteach myself how to do this every time I sew pants. Like, I don't know what part of my brain has the pants construction retention section, but it just, it's a hole. Like, it doesn't retain any information. It's just, anyway. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of flip it a little bit. Nope, that does exactly the same thing. Hold on. Wait, hold on. I think my brain had a thought. So drop this and open it up entirely. Aha, this is how you do it. Open it up entirely and match it up that way. Oh yeah, that's what you do. Yep, that's, you see, this is information I tell myself I'm going to retain, and then I'm going to forget how I did this in about 45 seconds. So yeah, open it up completely, flip it right side out, and then pin. So now on the, let's see, on the right side, and that is the right side when you're wearing it, we are going to sew all the way up and down this seam, and then on the left we're going to stop at, I believe there's a mark, yeah, there's a dot here, We're going to stop there because that is where we start doing some stuff with a placket, and it gets a little complicated. Alright, so here's what we're working with the pants so far. As you can see, they are very long, and on this leg I turned it up to the line where the cuff says it's supposed to be turned up. Still kind of long. I imagine with shoes on they would look a little bit better. Yeah, so this is what I'm working with currently. Everything fits pretty well, both to my delight and chagrin at the same time. I was really hoping I would be able to go down to an 18, but I guess not. Oh well. Anyway, so let's go ahead and move on, and I think we're going to do, there's like a placket piece that kind of covers everything to make sure that when you button you're still covered and you're not seeing like skin underneath. So let's go ahead and start working on that. Alright, so here I have the front of the pants. Here's the front pocket, here's the front. So now we are going to take piece 3, which is the facing, and we are going to pin this right here, which in theory should match up almost perfectly to So this is going to be right sides together, and the instructions do talk a little bit about putting on your interfacing, and they want you to zigzag stitch along the bottom to make sure that it doesn't fray. I'm not going to do that because lazy, and I don't really need this to last, 16 or so washes. So as you can see, the big dot, or hopefully you can see, the big dot here matches up perfectly with this big dot, which I believe I talked about how we clipped open to there, but if I didn't, you're supposed to clip open to that seam. So I'm just going to match that up and then sew it on with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You know what? It probably would have been better to sew it on from this side so you could like see where you're going and, accidentally like bunch that up. Yeah, I'm gonna repin this and sew it from the underside. And here's what that looks like when it's done. And the next step is to understitch the facing. So I'm going to flip this out, and from this side I'm going to stitch just very close to the stitch line all the way along the length of that first stitch, and that's so that when I turn this inward it also will take that stitch line inward and you won't see it from the outside. So this is the line of understitching over here, and then the instructions tell you to baste the top along the waistline, and then the instructions tell you to slip stitch this kind of facing down. I chose to baste it instead because this is a mock-up and I don't have to worry about there being any sort of visible top stitching because it's not going to matter. So now if you're making the overalls, you're going to skip the remainder of these instructions because that's how to finish the pants, and you're going to skip ahead to step 16, which is to start working on the bodice. So kind of generically you're going to do the darts, then you're going to do the side seam, and ideally you would stay stitch it, which if you don't know is just a line of stitching along the top to make sure that it doesn't stretch while you're working with it. I'm not going to do it again because lazy. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm also probably going to attach the pocket because it's going to get attached exactly the same way as it did on the pants, and I don't think you really need to see that twice. And here is what that looks like when it's done. We have our darts. I will admit it did kind of feel a little weird pinning a pocket over a dart because there's some shaping in the fabric behind here. It wasn't really that weird to sew, but like pinning it was kind of, it was just weird. And then here's this side seam over here. So here's what that looks like, and the next step is to work on piece 12, which is the straps. So you'll notice it has this neat little point over here, so we're going to fold these right sides together. Pretty simple. Stitch along this point to there and then all the way down. We're going to leave the end open, and then we're going to turn that loop and we will have some straps. Straps just like these. So we have some nice pointy-ended straps. Now on the edge of these straps, if you noticed, there should be a large circle and then a smaller circle. The smaller circle may have gotten kind of hidden in the seam allowance depending on how close you kind of sewed it. So here's kind of the remnants of mine. So now what we're going to do is attach these to the front of the bodice, and we're going to be matching up these small and large circles. So we're going to put this one over here, and then this one goes over here. Now that I think about it, since this is going to be the buttonhole and not the button, it doesn't really matter which side goes on which, because you know what, the buttonhole is going to go straight through, and there's not really going to have to be a right or a wrong side. But I guess if you wanted to keep in mind what would be the right side and the wrong side, even though it's a tube and all the fabric should be the right side. Anyway, I'm going to match this up and then baste it on. So now it is time to work on the facing. So I've already gone ahead and sewn the front facing and the back facing together and pressed that open nice and flat. Now the instructions have you attach the facing to the bodice, and then they have you kind of finish this edge of the facing after that. I don't know why they did that. Maybe there's a actual reason for it, but in my experience, it would be easier to finish the facing or edge finish the facing if you wanted to like roll it up and stitch it at this point, because it's going to be a lot easier to maneuver through your machine and do all the twists and turns that you're going to have to do. So if that's how you're choosing to finish the facing, you're probably going to want to go ahead and do that now. But if you wanted to just kind of like do a catch stitch on the bottom and tack this to the bodice, then yeah, you're probably going to want to wait to do that afterwards. I think they even tell you to do that afterwards at some point. I haven't read that far ahead. Anyway, so next I'm going to attach the facing to the bodice, figure out how all of this goes together. No, so you're going to attach it, then in theory is when you would do the edge finishing of your choice. And then you would clip all the corners, or clip all the curves, which there really aren't that many curves in this. But anyway, you would clip into the stitch line, and then you would understitch it. So you'd understitch the seam allowance to the facing, and then turn the facing under. Which, real quick, because I only just noticed this right now, is that this first edge of the facing goes along this side of the bodice. I kind of thought it just started at the top, but nah, it goes all the way down. So if you ever get confused and you're wondering why things don't line up, it's because it starts here, not here. Alright, we are faced, we are understitched, we are pressed, and we are moving on to the waistband. So the first thing we're going to do is take one of the waistband pieces and we are going to match this right sides together to the outside of the bodice. Now for this one I would recommend starting on this back piece seam and not the other side one. So you're going to take really good care to match up all your notches. This dot goes on the center seam, and then match up these notches up in the front, because there is a little bit of kind of excess overhang over here, and that's so that when we do the next step we can kind of sew up that seam, and it's going to do make a really nice finished seam right there. All right, so this time around we're going to baste it. And then the next time around, when we attach the second waistband piece, we're going to attach it to the inside, so right side down, and we are going to sew along this kind of edge. We're not going to catch the actual bodice, we're just going to go as close to it as we can, and then we're going to sew properly across the bottom, and then we will have a waistband. Okay, so the instructions on this last part confused me a little bit, so I didn't do everything completely correctly. So the important thing to note is that this outside piece of waistband is the waistband, and the inside piece of waistband is now the waistband facing. And I think they mentioned that earlier in the cutting process-ish part of this. So what you're supposed to have done is based on this outer waistband, and then when you go to pin and sew your inner waistband facing, you're supposed to fold that down and press it before you do that. But the way that the instructions are, it kind of makes you want to like fold this down, which is definitely not correct, which is why I didn't do it. So well, since it tells you to fold down a ½ inch and clip to 1/4 of an inch, and I happen to have about 1/4 of an inch left over, I'm just gonna fold that 1/4 of an inch down. It's not going to be a perfect measurement, which means that this waistband piece is going to be about, or the facing is going to be about 1/4 of an inch too long, but you know, that's okay. I'm okay with that. All right, so now we're going to work on attaching the pants to the bodice. So in preparation of that, we have pressed this waistband and the facing away from the bodice, and we have the seam allowance kind of neatly tucked in there. I've also folded over and pressed this edge of the facing. So now the instructions have you kind of pull that facing away a little bit, and that's mostly just to make sure you don't accidentally sew through it. And now we are going to take the pants and matching up all of our notches and lines and seams and sides and whatnot, we are going to pin and attach the pants to the bodice. So you have some notches up here, and there's some notches in the back. So I'm just going to go around and pin all of this, and then I assume we're just going to sew it on. Alright, so here the pants are sewn on. I've also gone ahead and pressed the seam allowance up into the waistband. So, interestingly enough, the instructions want you to top stitch this band from the outside. So we're going to pin this down to the waistband seam from the outside, and then we are going to top stitch along here and then along here. Now mine isn't going to match up properly because I didn't press it before I sewed it, and now I only have a little bit. And I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal because I thought it was going to get whip stitched down, and no, it's getting top stitched down. Which, that being said, I probably would not recommend trimming it down to 1/4 of an inch after you press the facing up. I'd probably leave that at 5/8 of an inch just to make sure that you have a little bit of wiggle room and make sure that you actually catch the seam allowance when you're sewing it from the top side. So I'm going to struggle with this for a little bit, and then we are going to move on to the next step, which I went ahead and did the ironing for while I was at the iron just to save myself a trip. So here is sort of what that looks like. Now, since this top stitching is visible, this is where you want to be super precise and careful and make sure all your rows are very straight, and also ideally an equal distance from each seam so that you don't have like a tiny seam up here and a bigger seam down here. Anyway, so now we are going to move on to the underlap. So I have here the underlap, and I decided not to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch because I really don't feel like it. And to be honest, I don't really see why we have to trim everything down to 1/4 of an inch. Like, I don't. Anyway, moving on. So now we are going to line this up with all of the appropriate. So it's going to go on this side. Did I press this the wrong way? I think I pressed this the wrong way. Well, that's odd, because I made all of my markings on all of my pieces on the right side, including this piece. So why is everything on the wrong side? Unless this was the... No, because this got to match up. That's weird. Did I cut that out wrong? It's like, well, I must have cut this out wrong somehow. So pretend that this is the wrong side. So we're going to do right side to right side. It's a little odd. I'm not quite sure how that happened. I genuinely don't know how that happened. Alright, so somehow I managed to cut this out backwards. Not quite sure how I managed to not notice that everything was backwards, but oh well, I transferred over the markings, and now I'm going to attach this properly with right sides together. This thing doesn't match up too well, but that's okay. No, it does. Okay, whatever. I'm just going to get this sewn on because I have no idea what's happening right now. All I know is I have to sew this seam together, match up the notches, and then we're going to go to the iron and try to fix all of this pressing situation. You'd think by step 26 I would have learned that I should read the directions before I do things, because then everything's going to make more sense. But anyway, so I have that underlap attached. I also went ahead and pressed this seam allowance towards the underlap, and I thought I was being smart and thinking ahead by just folding this over so that, you know, we can stitch it down. But what I want you to do first is to fold this kind of back onto itself this way, and then stitch straight across here, so that it'll kind of make a nice finished edge when we turn everything back where it's supposed to be. So I'm just going to stitch across here real quick, and since I already have, you know, the rest of everything pressed, I'm going to go ahead and open that or close that back where it's supposed to be. In the instructions, I believe, have you catch stitch and do this by hand. I'm going to baste it by machine because, again, I'm lazy. Now this one, I do kind of understand why they tell you to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch, and that's just, I believe, to make sure you have enough clearance between the seam allowance and this button placement so that you don't have to sew through, you know, 6 layers of fabric and just the 2 to sew through the buttons, or to sew the buttons on. So I'm going to stitch, turn this back out, quickly stitch, probably clip that corner, and then turn everything right side out, and then baste it down. Alright, so here's what that looks like, and even with the basting stitch, it doesn't actually look that bad. Anyway, so this next step, step 29 if you're following along, is a little confusing, and it's worded kind of weird, but what I'm like 95% sure all of that nonsense of what it's trying to say and trying to get you to do, I think it's just trying to get you to take this underlap, this piece we just sewed, and then this front facing, you remember this part we worked on earlier that's all nice and finished now? I think what it's trying to get us to do is basically just match these pieces together and then sew across here, and that's going to close that up nicely. I'm like 95% sure that's what it's trying to get us to do. It talks about like matching up dots and pulling things away, and I'm pretty sure this is just what they want us to do. So I'm going to do that and hope that is correct. All right, I'm pretty sure this is what it's supposed to look like. So this way it just kind of lays nice and flat when you have the buttons on. Mine didn't line up 100% perfectly, which is why I have a little bit of some weird puckering over here, but I'm not too worried about it. So now the next step is to do all of the buttonholes and the buttons, but I'm going to skip ahead to the cuffs and do all the buttonholes and the buttons later. So first thing I'm going to do is turn this under by 1/2 inch, and then we're going to fold it, I believe, and we're going to do some folding. Hold on. All right, so here are the cuffs of my pants. So now I have them pressed over by about pressed under by about 1/2 inch. So now what we're going to do is we have our cuff line that I marked on the edges of the pattern piece, and we are going to fold this up on the line all the way around. And the instructions tell you to slip stitch it, but I am going to be basting it by machine because I don't really care about visible top stitching at this point, as we have well established. So I'm going to fold that, and I'm going to do that on both cuffs. I'm going to pin and baste around, and then we will move on, and then you're going to turn it right side out and then flip the cuff again. We'll get there. All right, so now here is the cuff of my pants. I ran out of red thread halfway through, so I had to switch to green. Which I also just ran out of green, so if I want to do anything else I have to wind a bobbin, which kind of makes me not want to actually do buttonholes and just pin it because I hate winding bobbins. Anyway, so now the next step is to fold this up again. Now we're not going to fold it all the way up because we don't want the seam line to show, so we're going to fiddle with it a little bit, and then once we get probably about this much underneath, we're going to give this a good press all around, and then the instructions have you do a French tack on the seams, which I think just means like just tack it at these points real quick to make sure that it doesn't flop over. So I'm probably just going to pin it instead of actually tacking it, but I will go ahead and give this a good press, and I think that's the last ironing I have to do for this project. One of these days I'm going to learn not to do mock-up videos with dark underwear. Today is not that day. Alright, so here are the finished overalls. I did not go ahead and do the buttons because I really don't feel like winding a bobbin right now. So I just pinned everywhere that there are supposed to be buttons and buttonholes, and here's what we're dealing with. It is a little tight around the midsection. I'm not too mad about it though. It feels very nice and supportive. I did also eat a lot of Oreos in the past day and a half, so that might have something to do with it. Personally, I like my front pockets to be a little bit more centered because I do everything with my right hand, which this is definitely a right-handed jumper pattern, but I'm sure you could easily switch this over to the left hand. Just kind of move the pockets over if you are left-handed, and it makes it easier to reach in this way and this way, and with your left hand it would be here and here. Anyway, I think this is super cute. Like this is incredibly cute, and I think maybe even like if you don't put the pockets on it, or if you did like maybe just the hip pockets and not the top pockets, you could even go for like a 70s vibe with this. It has they have a nice wide leg. I mean, they're straight like the 40s, but you could even go for like a 70s vibe with this. I'm feeling this. I like this. Yeah. The pants even fall at like a decent length for my short little legs. Alright, so let's talk about this pattern. I think that this is super cute. I totally see why this is such a popular pattern and a lot of people really, really like it. It's adorable. I feel so cute in this. I really like it. I'm already kind of eyeing I have like a stretch or slightly stretch wool kind of suiting in my stash, and I think I have enough to make this. I'm gonna have to double check that, but it's calling my name. I think this might be one of my next actual big projects. In case you're curious, the blouse I am wearing is a version of McCall's M7184. I have it over there, I'm reading. So 7184, I do have a video all about making that, so if you are interested, I will link it in a card somewhere up here for you to check out. As I'm sure you noticed, I didn't actually sew on any buttons because I'm a little lazy and I really don't want to spend all the time sewing buttons onto a mock-up just to probably have to unstitch them. And I apparently am a sucker for pain because I have stabbed myself with these pins so many times, but you know what? I just keep doing it. I just keep making that choice to just use pins. I'm actually kind of surprised with how well this fits. Like, I think everything hits where it's supposed to. There's a little bit of a gaping up at the top, but I'm not too concerned about that. The pants, the hem hits just about where I would want it to. I didn't have to do any sort of adjusting on that. That's just kind of naturally where they hit, so I'm really happy with that. Everything fits really well. I don't remember if I talked about it earlier, but I with my issue of like my long torso, sometimes things that are full body don't fit me. This fits really well. I don't have everything getting hoisted up into my business, so I am very pleasantly surprised with how this fits. There's not really too much negative about this pattern. The only thing that jumps out is this was a lot of pattern pieces, like a lot. If I remember correctly, there were 14 separate pattern pieces just in this overalls section. It's kind of a lot. And also the fact that, I don't know if it's just in like this printing, because I have this in smaller size and the envelope is much smaller, which makes me think that they use less tissue. But anyway, the fact that every piece that I needed was on one like bundle of tissue paper except for one, and I had to open up this entire separate bundle just to get one piece, that admittedly was a little frustrating. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I definitely thoroughly enjoyed making this pattern. I am looking forward to making it for real at some point in time. If you want to see me make it for real, then go ahead and leave that in a comment down below, and if you want to see it, I will definitely go ahead and do that. If you're interested in seeing some behind-the-scenes real-time updates, updates on previous projects, you can go ahead and give me a follow over on Instagram, over at Thread and Needlefish. That's where I post all kinds of stuff like that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! I call this position the caterpillar. Oh, thank you. Ooh. I'm sorry. Go back to sleep.